Alrighty folks, this week I want to show you exactly how easy it is to draft your very own crochet skirt pattern so you can make a skirt that is absolutely perfect for you. A year ago I made this, probably my pride and joy. So this is a dupe of the Cactus Plant Flea Market cardigan that I saw Timothy Chalamet wearing. I made a whole video about how I figured out how to make the pattern, but yeah, I drafted this pattern completely just from looking at a few images on the internet and it turned out perfect and I'm really happy with it. So I thought it would be fun to make a matching mini skirt for this because I think that'd be a really awesome outfit. Also, skirts are super fun and versatile and they're a great thing to start out drafting patterns for because they're pretty simple. So I thought that would be a great place for us to start on our pattern drafting journey. So I'm going to use making my skirt as a little bit of a guide for showing you how it can be done. I'll show you exactly what I do to get my measurements and get my counts and figure out exactly how I want to construct it. And then you can apply it to the sort of skirt you want to make. I'm going to cover a bunch of stuff today, so I made a heap of notes so I don't get lost and I don't miss out on anything. But the key things we're going to look at are gauge and calculations, how to use existing clothing as a template, different types of skirts and the silhouettes and lengths you might want to choose from when you're designing, the construction approaches we can take when making our skirt, different shaping techniques and different waistband options for the skirt as well. So for this project, you're going to need a few things. You'll need all your crochet supplies, yarn, hook and scissors. You'll also want a tape measure. This is definitely going to be crucial. A calculator will be handy because we'll be doing a bunch of calculations. Also, the other thing I like to have on hand when I'm drafting patterns is a garment similar to what I want to be making. So this is one of my favorite skirts. It's a really nice one to wear. It's the perfect size and it's the perfect length. Also, it's got a really similar construction to the skirt I want to be making. So I will be using this as a little bit of a guide throughout the process. If you don't have a garment similar to what you want to be making, that's okay. You don't really need it. You can just work with pure calculations and measurements, but it does make things a little bit easier to be able to visualize how you're going in the process of making it. Step one for drafting your pattern is you want to come up with a design for what sort of skirt you want to make. And there's a bunch of different types of skirts. You probably have favorite skirt styles you like wearing. So I would probably think of using one of those as a little bit of a guide for what you want to wear. For example, I do like little skirts and I find they're fun to wear. So when I was thinking of something that would match this cardigan well, I thought a mini skirt would be perfect because it has that similar sort of boxy fit as the cardigan has, but it's not going to be so big and overwhelming because this cardigan is a lot. There's a lot going on. It's quite bold. So obviously, if I had a maxi skirt going with this, it would be maybe a bit too much. Honestly, a mini skirt might even be too much, but I think it'll be fun. But some skirt types you might want to look at are A-line skirts. So this is a classic sort of shape that narrows at the waist and gradually widens towards the hem. It's a really easy style of skirt. You would probably have something similar to this in your wardrobe. It's also a good shape to make, especially if you're doing a mini or a knee-length skirt. An A-line will always kind of work. And then there's the pencil skirt. It's more straight and narrow skirt. It hugs the body. It generally ends above or below the knee. Also with a pencil skirt, you want to think about how easy it is to move in. And that's why you'll often see pencil skirts with a slit at the side or at the back. A different silhouette for skirts is a circle or a full skirt. These are quite dramatically flared and they're the sort of skirts you twirl around a lot in. These ones would take a lot more crocheting because the construction of the skirt involves a lot more fabric. You could also consider doing a gathered skirt or a tiered or a peasant skirt. Maybe also just be mindful of thinking about the thickness of crochet when you're designing your skirt style as well, because crochet does generally work up into a pretty thick fabric. So you want to be considerate of that when you're considering the addition of ruffles or pleats or anything like that, that it might be a little bit harder to put into the construction as opposed to if you were just sewing with some fabric. So once you've had a little thought about the silhouette, you might also want to think about the length you want to do. So you could go with whatever length you like. And the good thing about crochet is you can quite often design your pattern so you can work and adjust the length as you're going. So you can sort of work your way from the top down and just stop when you get to the length you want. So for my skirt, I'm going to do a mini, but also you could just sort of go knee length, midi, or even a full length skirt. I've seen crochet skirts on Pinterest in every length and they're all amazing. So just choose whatever you love the most. Also be mindful of the longer the skirt, the more you will have to do and the more yarn you'll need. So remember that. So for my design, I'm going to go pretty much straight off this one I've got, and I'm going to make a slightly A-line mini skirt. It's going to be pretty much the same length as this one. It'll be the same width at the top, but I do want to taper mine in slightly more than this one, just because I want mine to be a little bit more fitted. And then thinking about the waistband, that brings me to point number 2 you probably want to consider when you're coming up with your pattern, and that is, what kind of waistband do you want for your skirt? So obviously your skirt is going to need a waistband of some kind for it to stay up. That's probably just, yeah, we definitely need that. So this one has an elastic casing waistband. So it's got a casing of knitted fabric with a piece of elastic inside. So you would be familiar with this style of construction from anything, tracksuit pants, pajama pants, other things. It's a really good option. The one thing that might make this option slightly less appealing is, again, going back to how thick crochet fabric can be. So for example, if you've got a waistband with 2 layers of crochet fabric and then elastic in between, it might be a little bit thicker than what you want for your waistband. That was what I was thinking anyway with mine. Because this is machine knit, it's a very fine sort of knit fabric, so it doesn't matter that this is doubled over. But for my waistband, I was thinking of just doing a single section of the fabric and then attaching the elastic to the back of this. The other option is you could do a sewn waistband. So you could complete the crochet section in your skirt, but then you could add on a sewn waistband that would have elastic in the casing as well. The other option is you could feed a drawstring or a tie through your crochet section. Also, it wouldn't add any more bulk to your fabrics. And you would see this a lot in kind of beachy crochet skirts as well, which I think always look cute. And that brings me to the next point. Do you want to line your skirt? Because as we said before, crochet is quite open, and that means it's quite see-through at times, especially depending on the stitch you choose to use. So you might want to add a lining to your skirt. I would definitely be considering how you might want to do this in the design phase, just so you can make considerations for that, especially depending on how you want to do your waistband construction. So now we've got some of our design considerations figured out, we want to think about how we want to be constructing our skirt. So there's 2 main types of construction methods I generally like to think of when I'm considering skirts, and that is whether we're going to work in panels or whether we're going to work in the round. So when you're working in panels, you work up 2 or more flat pieces of fabric that you then join at the end to create your finished garment. So for example, in my cardigan, I had multiple panels. I had 2 front sections, I had a back section, 2 sleeves, and then the collar I added on at the end. I find working in panels a really good construction method for me because I come from a sewing background as well. And in sewing, you use pattern pieces, which are generally just panels of things, and you construct them together. You can add in additional shaping, but for me, I love thinking about things in terms of panels. I feel like it just really makes a lot of sense for me. If you don't want to work in panels, you could also work in the round, which if you've been crocheting for a while, you probably would have worked in the round before, and it can be a really good option for skirts, because if you think about skirts, they're kind of just like a big tube, and working in the round is really good for that. So you could work from the top down or the bottom up and just make continuous rounds and circles all the way up. You would add in shaping at some points if needed, but it can be a really good option for skirts because you wouldn't have any visible seams and you wouldn't have to sew up anything or join anything at the end, which can also make things a little bit quicker. The main thing you want to consider, whether you're working in panels or in the round, is how you're going to add the shaping for your skirt. Also, you want to think about the sort of skirts you like to wear, how much shaping they have, and also your body type too, because we're all shaped differently, and the beauty of drafting your own pattern is you can create something that will be a great fit for you, but you need to sort of consider if you need to add in more or less shaping, especially with skirts, depending on the difference between your waist and your hip measurement. So if your waist and your hip measurements are pretty similar, you won't need to add as much shaping in, but if your waist is a lot smaller than your hips, you'll need to think about how you want to shape it so it fits your waist really nicely while still being the right size to sit on your hips really well, and also so you can get it on. If you're working in panels for your skirt, you'd probably want to be shaping down the sides of the panels. So if you're working from the bottom up, you would make decreases as you're working upwards to decrease the amount of stitches and create your panel shape. If you're working from the top down, you would want to make increases to make it start to widen out towards the bottom. If you do too much shaping between the hip section and the waist section, you might not be able to get it on. So you always need to be mindful of whether you can fit into your skirt when you're putting it on, because stretchy skirts like this are fine because you can always sort of make it wide enough at the top to stretch over your hips. But if your fabric is quite stiff and you make quite a lot of shaping at the top and the waist of your garment is a lot smaller in measurement than your hip measurement, it will be hard to get on without the use of a opening with either a zip or a button closure or something like that. So for my skirt, I am going to do an A-line mini skirt in 2 panels, a front and a back. The front and back are going to be exactly the same, which makes things really easy. And I'm going to work from the bottom up because that's what I did in my cardigan, so I want it to be the same as that. And I'm going to make decreases as I work up. But now I know what I want to do, I need to figure out how I'm going to do it. And to do that, I need to do a gauge swatch and some calculations. So a gauge swatch, if you haven't made one before, is essentially just a piece of fabric in which you're testing out the exact stitch you're going to do in your garment with the exact yarn and the exact hook size to get an idea of what it's going to look like, and then a perfect thing to measure off so you can make the calculations for coming up with your pattern. When you're doing a gauge swatch, it's a really good practice to do it big enough so that it's either 4 inches square or 10 centimeters across. And that's best kind of practice, and you'll see that in a lot of patterns when they're doing gauge swatches. So it's good to get in the habit of doing it at least that size, because then you can see exactly how many stitches will fit into 10 centimeters across and 10 centimeters in terms of the rows. So I did this gauge swatch up when I was making my cardigan. Obviously it's a bit bigger than, 4 inches across, because I wanted to get an idea of what it looked like when it was all together, because I wanted to see how my rows looked in terms of the patterning. So for this pattern, I'm doing a row of single crochet and then a row of double crochet, and I'm essentially just repeating that all the way through. And the other thing that was crucial to making this cardigan was switching from the back to the front for each row. So I would do my single crochets across one way, and then I'd turn my work, join on a new yarn, and then do my double crochets back on the other side. If you want more details about my exact stitches that I'm using and how I did this cardigan, you can have a look at the video, because I do go into a lot more detail there about it if you're wanting to make a skirt, sort of like this one too. But basically, once you've done your gauge swatch, technically you should block it first if it is a fibre that you think will change it all in the washing and blocking process. You would definitely want to do that first. And then you take your tape measure and then figure out exactly how many stitches fit into 10 centimeters of work and how many rows will fit into 10 centimeters. So for this sample, I used 8-ply cotton, a 3.5 millimeter crochet hook. For mine, because the single crochet and the double crochet are obviously different heights, I'm actually counting a single crochet and double crochet together as one row. So every row is made up of a single crochet and a double crochet. And 10 centimeters across equals 16 stitches. And across my 10 centimeters, I can also fit in 6 rows. So I now know how many stitches fit into 10 centimeters of my fabric, but now I need to know how many centimeters the skirt should be across at both the bottom and the top of the skirt, but also kind of every point in between is really important, especially if we're wanting to grade a curve down the side of the skirt so we get a really nice line to the side of our skirts. So I'm going to be using my existing skirt that I love as a guide for my measurements, but if you're not working from a garment like this, you'll need to take some measurements of your own. I'm going to show you how to do this, but for simplicity, I'm just going to use centimeters. If you prefer inches, please use inches. So first up, you're going to measure around your body where you want your waistband of your skirt to sit. This can either sit at, above, or below your natural waistline. So for mine, I measured around and it was 84 centimeters where I want the waistband of the skirt to sit. Then you're going to want to do the same for your hip measurement, and this for me was 102 centimeters. Then you're going to want to take a measurement for how wide you want your skirt to be at the hem. For mine, I think I want it to be about 112 centimeters around, but I'm going to compare this against my grey skirt that I love, just so I can know exactly what the measurement should be compared to a skirt that I already own. And then you can see how these 3 measurements will make up the basis of my skirt, but I also want to know how long my skirt will be from the bottom of the waistband down to the hem. So for me, I want this to be 40 centimeters. And because we measured our body around, these measurements are perfect if you're working in the round, but because I'm making my skirt in 2 panels, I actually need to divide these measurements by 2 to get the width of the panels. Because I'm doing my front and my back panel the same, this will be perfect. If you are working in the round, use the full measurements and plan to do your decreases down each side. Now let's see how these measurements compare to my existing skirt. So I'm going to add in a trim at both sides of my skirt to match my jacket, and this is going to add about 1 centimeter to each side, so I'm going to take that into account. So here we can see the waist at my original skirt is 40 centimeters and my waist measurement divided by 2 was 42. So this is a good measurement because I want my skirt to fit snugly around my waist so it doesn't fall down. But you'll notice that if I stretch out the elastic, the crochet fabric would be more like 45 centimeters across. And having this wider at the top is important because this is what helps us be able to get it over our hips, and it's the elastic that's in the waistband that cinches it into the final waist measurement. So this means my crochet panel at the top needs to be wider than our final waist measurement so I can get it over my hips. For my pattern, I want this top measurement to be 45 centimeters. And the hip measurement on this skirt is 52 centimeters, which is a little bit bigger than my hip measurement. Again, this makes sense because I don't want the skirt to be exactly my measurement at the hips because then it would be quite tight. Instead, this gives a couple centimeters of positive ease, which is the difference between your body measurements and the garment measurements. But for my hip measurement on the skirt, I'm actually going to do this panel to be 50 centimeters at the hip measurement because this will allow an extra centimeter on each side for the trim that I'm going to add. And the hem at the bottom of this skirt is actually 59 centimeters across. But remember, I wanted my skirt to be a little bit more narrow at the hem, so I'm going to use 55 centimeters for this measurement. So to recap, my crochet panel measurements for both the front and the back panels are going to be 45 centimeters at the top, 50 centimeters at the hip line, 55 centimeters at the hem line, and 40 centimeters from the bottom of the waistband to the bottom of the hem. And then after these 2 panels are sewn together, I'll add on the waistband at the end. Alrighty, so now I know how I want my skirt to end up. I need to do some calculations. And to do that, I need to go back to my swatch and work out the amount of stitches and rows per centimeter. Again, if you're working in inches, please adjust these instructions accordingly. And so in our swatch, we did a 10 centimeter or 4-inch square, and we had 16 stitches across the 10 centimeters, and we had 6 rows. But now we want to figure out exactly how many stitches and how many rows are in 1 single centimeter of work. So to do this, we take our stitch number, which is 16, and we divide this by the amount of centimeters we worked across, which is 10, and then we're left with 1.6. So for every 1 centimeter of work, we have 1.6 stitches. If you were using inches for this, all you do is you take that 16, which is the amount of stitches, you divide this by 4, which is the amount of inches you worked across, and then you'd be left with 4 stitches per inch. And we'll repeat that again for our rows. So because we had 6 rows across 10 centimeters of work, we divide 6 by 10 and we're left with 0.6 rows per centimeter. Again, if you're working in inches, this would be 6 divided by 4 inches, which would equal 1.5 rows per inch. So these numbers are going to be important to us in the next stage of calculation. So because I'm working in centimeters, I'm going to take this number here, 1.6 stitches per centimeter, as my stitch calculation. And I'm going to take this one here, 0.6 rows per centimeter, as my row calculation. Now I can transfer these calculations onto my crochet panel measurements for how I want my panel to end up, and just using a few simple calculations, I can figure out how many stitches across I will need at each point for my skirt. So at the base of my skirt panel, I want it to be 55 centimeters across. So all I do now is take this 55 centimeters and I times it by 1.6, which is our stitch calculation because I'm trying to get the amount of stitches in this row. So 55 times 1.6 equals 88 stitches. So now I know that for this bottom of this panel, I'm going to need 88 stitches to get that 55 centimetre width. Again, I'll repeat the measurement up here for the 50 centimetres at the hip line. So 50 times 1.6, this equals 80 stitches. And at the top, we want 45 times 1.6, this equals 72 stitches. So that's our stitch counts taken care of for the time being, but we also need to consider how many rows we're going to do for our skirt. So we know we want to do 40 centimetres here from the bottom of the waistband to the bottom of the hem. So what we do is we take this 40 centimetres and we times it by our row calculation. So 40 times 0.6 equals 24 rows. So now we know our skirt is going to have 24 rows to get to this point. But now there's one more step we have to calculate, and that's how we're going to get from this 88 stitches here to this 72 stitches up here. So we need to decrease some stitches to get this curve of our A-line skirt, and we need to do it over a certain amount of rows. This is where it gets a little bit more tricky, but there's only a little bit of calculations to go, so hang in there with me. So when I was coming up with the design for my skirt, I knew I wanted mine to be slightly more fitted at the bottom than my current grey skirt. So I thought it would be good if I had a section where I didn't do any decreases and it just sort of went up straight on both sides. So I'm going to draw out exactly how I want my panel to look here, and then we're going to figure out how to do our decreases over the length of our work. So this is our waistline and this is our hemline. I know at my hemline I'm going to be doing 88 stitches, but I know also that I want to continue this up in a straight fashion for about 12 centimetres. I'll put that 12 centimetres here. So at this point I know I've got 88 stitches here. I also know that I've got 88 stitches at this point too, because I don't want any decreases happening in the first section of my skirt. So for this 12 centimetres, all I do is go 12 times our row calculation, 0.6, and this equals 7.2 rows. For the time being, I'm just going to consider this as 7, and we're just going to drop that 0.2 for now. So for the first 7 rows of my pattern, I'm going to work 88 stitches. After this point though, I'm going to want to start doing my decreases because I eventually need to get it up to 72 stitches for the waistband. So to do this, I'm going to go up another 14 centimetres to get to the hip line measurement. And because this is the hip line, I know I want it to be at 80 stitches at this point. So if I've got 14 centimetres in this section, I can just go 14 times 0.6, which equals 8.4. And then from this hip line to the waistband, we've got another 14 centimetres to fill in, because 14, 14 and 12 equals 40 centimetres, which is the proper height for our skirt. So in this 14 centimetres, we consider another 8.4 rows. And now I need to figure out the rate of decrease to get from this 88 stitches to this 80 stitches, then to this 72 stitches. Because I'm going to decrease on both sides, when I do a row, I will be decreasing 2 stitches every time I do a decrease row. So I've got 8.5 rows here in which to complete 8 decreases to go from 88 to 80 stitches. So because I'm doing 2 decreases per decrease row, I'll need to decrease 4 times over this period. So if I've got 8.4 rows, I'm going to decrease every second row at this point. And you'll see in this top section here, we have another 14 centimetres, and we also have another 8 stitches we need to decrease in this amount of space. So again, we would say let's decrease every second row at the start and end of each row, so we're decreasing 2 stitches each time. So that way, over 8 rows, we will decrease these 8 stitches. But you'll remember we had this little sneaky 0.4, this 0.4 and this 0.2 over here that we haven't considered. because all up we have 24 rows, but so far I've only accounted for 23 of these rows because of these little extra bits. So what I'm actually thinking of doing is I'll do my decreases every second row here. In this section, instead of decreasing every second row, I'll just add in an extra row, our little bonus row from before, as a space where we're not going to have a decrease. And that way we'll get all our decreases in across the amount of rows that we need. Hopefully that all makes sense. Trying to explain the calculations can be a little bit confusing, especially when we've got all these numbers sort of going on, but hopefully you can make sense of it and you can apply this exact same process to the skirt you're doing, because it really will give you the exact stitch counts and row counts you need, and it'll tell you exactly where to be doing your decreases, so your skirt is going to end up perfect and you hopefully won't have to frog any rows and redo anything. If any of this is confusing, you can also draw out a bigger map to sort of help explain it to yourself, so when you're doing your actual pattern it's going to be a lot easier. So if I draw up a big version of the skirt here, and we've got our little flat bit down here, it's going to be a little bit messy, but stay with me. For the first 7 rows, I'm going to have 88 stitches and 88 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then I'm going to have 8 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. At this point, I'm going to be at 80 stitches. And then I'm going to consider that sneaky little 1 row in here. And then I'm going to do another 8 rows up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's my 8th. And at this point, we're going to be at 72 stitches. So each of these marks here represents 1 row. And in this section, we're just going to go from 88 stitches to 88 stitches without any decreases. But in this section, we've got to make a decrease every second row, and we'll be decreasing on this side and on this side of the row too. So I'm going to start with the decreases. So if I say this is a decrease, this is a decrease, this one I'll decrease, and this one I'll decrease. And then remember, I was going to skip 2 stitches to account for this sort of extra row in here. And then I'll start my decreases again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know exactly which rows to decrease on to get my stitch count from 88 stitches to 72 across the amount of rows that I need to make it the perfect length. Okay, so now we've got everything figured out. We know exactly what we're making and we've got the gauge and the calculations to start making it. I'm actually going to jump into making my one, and I'm going to show you the process of getting the making of it started and making any adjustments along the way if we need to. So I crocheted the back panel doing alternate rows of double crochet and single crochet in a different colour for each row. Every now and then I would lay this over my grey skirt and take measurements to make sure I was on the right track. Then I crocheted some more, checked my measurements again, then crocheted some more, making sure to do my decreases at the start and end of the necessary rows in the pattern. And then, before I knew it, it was all done and looking great. It follows that A-line shape really nicely, and here's where it's a bit wider at the top where the elastic will tighten this in later. And the measurements are exactly as we planned out in the pattern, which is the benefit of doing all those boring calculations. So after this perfect panel, I made the other one exactly the same, and you can see here, this is the first 7 rows without any decreases. Then in this row I decreased, and then this one, this one, this one. Here is where I skipped over 2 rows and then continued decreasing here, 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 and here. Then I had to deal with all these yarn ends and sew the sides together. I like to do an extra knot for each of these threads, then I single crocheted along the edge, gathering the yarn ends in my work for a few stitches as I worked to neaten it up. Then I trimmed up the extra yarn ends. So everything's moving along really great with this skirt. We've got 2 panels done. It's looking amazing. I love all the colours. They're just so fun together. And I've done the edging on the skirt. This is completely optional depending on what sort of skirt you want to make. Maybe there's a design feature you want to include kind of like this, but you might just want to do your skirt completely like just 2 panels put together at the sides, or even work in the round. But for mine, I wanted to have the black border at the side seams to match my jacket because I feel like that's going to look extra good. So now I'm just going to stitch up the side seams. I'm going to do a mattress stitch for that, and this border that I put on just makes that so simple. Alrighty, I'm going to jump back into it, but we're very close to having a skirt finished. If you're following along at home, hopefully you have got some good designs together and you're making something fun yourself. I used a mattress stitch to join the 2 panels together. This trim makes it really easy to do this, and I think it looks really neat. Then I worked in the round for 2 rows for the waistband, starting and ending with a black single crochet row. I found some elastic and some lycra in my stash to use for the lining. I cut the lining so that when it was sewn up it would be a tiny bit smaller than the skirt, and I made sure there was enough fabric at the top to do a fold over casing for the elastic. Then I sewed this up, put the elastic in, and it was all finished and looking amazing. And now that it's all sewn up, the measurements are perfect, the elastic waistband works like a dream, and the lycra lining is soft and stretchy. I sewed the elastic into the lycra casing and stitched it down to the crochet skirt using black thread over the black rows so you can't even see it. Then, if I compare it to my grey skirt, we can see how the sizing worked out. It's a little bit more narrow at the hem like we planned, but all the other measurements are the same as the grey skirt, so I know this one is going to fit me perfectly. And that is the skirt all finished. So it turned out exactly as I wanted. Chewy always sits on it whenever I put it down. But yeah, it's absolutely perfect and I love it. I think the single and double crochet rows look really fun together. The colors are super bright. It's a very bright skirt, and I think when I'm wearing it with the jacket, it's going to be quite the look. But I think it will be fun. And yeah, I'm just really happy with how it turned out. Also, the lining is so nice in this one. I'm actually really glad I just used the lycra I had lying around because it made it really sort of slippery inside. So I think it's going to be really good if I'm wearing tights underneath. It'll not sort of be frictiony at all when I'm wearing it, which will be perfect. So if you followed along and you've made a skirt of your very own, whether it looks similar to this one or it's something completely of your own design, I hope you had fun and I hope it turned out exactly as you wanted. If you do have any questions or if something I've said hasn't been very clear, please leave me a comment and I'll try and get back to you with a response. Or if other knowledgeable people watching know the answer to things, they can always answer too. But if you enjoyed this video and would like a little bit more in the sort of pattern drafting realm, just let me know what you might be interested in because I had fun making this one and I would love to show you some other things too if you're interested in that. One thing I was thinking of, I really want to make a granny square skirt coming up, so I thought it's a little bit different doing a pattern design for granny squares just because you're working within the constraints of squares, which is different. But I thought that could be a good thing to show you if anyone else might be interested in that too. But I don't know, let me know. Anyway, thank you for sticking around with this one and I hope you had a nice time and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.